I will go ahead and just get started if you guys don't mind. We're a few minutes past the hour. I'm sure that we'll have more people trickle in, but for the sake of everybody's time, I'll just start with me. I'm Melissa Yao, the Executive Director of the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, NTSA. And before I do any formal introductions to our speakers, I have to go through housekeeping because it would not be a webinar without housekeeping. So the number one thing is this is being recorded. And I will be sending it out, not I, my team, will be sending it out to all of the people that registered once we clean it up. We're also sending it to Florida and Michigan's bar for you to able to get the CLEs. So if you're in one of those states, please feel free to utilize that. You can message Danielle, who's facilitated the registration for this webinar, if you want to utilize that. So excited to be able to offer that to you guys. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Nate and Amanda with the Joseph Project. You guys can introduce yourselves much more thoroughly than I can, but I'll just say, for those of you not familiar with NTSA, we are almost like a trade association for residential programs for survivors. And so we have a network of about 105 organizations in 36 states across the country. And we all really work hard to collaborate in order to enhance the quality of care we offer to survivors. And one of the resources that is lacking or underutilized are legal remedies. And that's why we're so grateful to have a partnership with the Joseph Project. Nate and Amanda have just been an incredible partner for us and our members that I'm sure you'll hear loads and loads of examples of the life-altering support they've been able to provide for survivors. And they've offered that to NTSA's members for free. And so thank you for the work that you guys do. Eager to hear more about the efforts you're doing and some of the trends you're seeing in terms of legal remedies for survivors. So I will let you take it away. And you're muted, Nate. Once again, you can't have a webinar without someone being muted. So Nate, go ahead, unmute yourself. You're still muted.
How about now?
We got you. We can hear you.
Hey, fantastic. Okay. Well, I appreciate that, Melissa. And to all of you who are on the webinar, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend. My name is Nate Napper. I'm the founder and CEO of the Joseph Project. This is a nonprofit organization that connects human trafficking survivors with pro bono legal services. And, I am mindful of the fact that it is a little bit after 4 o'clock on the Thursday before Veterans Day, a federal holiday. And so we want to maximize your time, make sure it's of value to you. But I would be remiss if I didn't begin by saying thank you to our veterans. I don't know if we have a veteran on the call, perhaps we have several, or if you have a family member or a friend or know someone who serves in the armed forces, but that's important to us. And I certainly want to offer our thanks and best wishes on behalf of TJP to those individuals who have served, and it's through their sacrifice we acknowledge that we're able to do all the things that we enjoy doing here in America. So, with that preface, it's amazing to join you. I just briefly also want to thank the NTSA, the National Trafficking Sheltered Alliance, for hosting and coordinating with us to bring you this webinar today. And as Melissa said, I do think that it is such a vital and important topic that sometimes often goes overlooked in the context of serving survivors of trafficking. And so I look forward to having this conversation with you today. And as we were saying before people jumped on the call here, as we were sort of in the waiting room together, I hope that toward the end we'll have a substantial opportunity for some Q&A, where if people have questions, they drop them in the chat, maybe they chime in. We're able to address some of those as they arise. So, my goal for the time that I have to present is really just to offer a bit of context for why I think this discussion is so important within the context of serving survivors. And so I would just offer that up to you before I turn it over to our wonderful legal director, Amanda Palitz, who's going to be sharing even more about the legal needs of survivors and some of the needs that we see at TJP and how we actively work to meet those needs. So like many of you on the call, I've had the opportunity to interact firsthand with numerous human trafficking survivors. I am an FBI special agent based out of our Detroit division where I work. And in that capacity, I started my career on our human trafficking squad. And so this is a very frontline enforcement type role where you are tasked with going into private residences, sometimes vehicles, sometimes hotels and motels. And the idea is always some version of the same thing, right? You're going in with the intent to pull someone out who you learn is being trafficked, whether that be an adult or a juvenile. It could be a female, it could be a male. Many times it's female, but we've seen the whole gamut. And so in that capacity, I would recover victims of trafficking, of this brutal form of exploitation out of deplorable conditions that nobody on the call would want to spend any substantial amount of time at all. And many times when we would recover those individuals, we would work with service providers, just like the ones that are a part of the NTSA network. And just like many of you who are on the call, we would work with people just like you to connect those survivors that we brought back to the police stations with the appropriate type of service that they needed. And as I'm sure many of you know, those services really ran the gamut from immediate housing needs to basic food and drink. Many times rehab services were involved in this because of the drugs that were associated with the situation. So many times there were service providers right there on site who would work to connect the people that we would bring to them with those types of services. But I'm also an attorney, and in that capacity, I sort of view life through that legal lens, right? I was almost a 4-year assistant attorney general in the state of Michigan before transitioning to the FBI. And so as I was looking at what was happening, we were pulling these victims out of these horrible situations and we were connecting them with these services. But almost every time, what I was seeing is that these survivors had very substantial legal needs when they came out of the circumstances of their exploitation. And these needs were very diverse. Sometimes it was a criminal record. Perhaps there were drug charges or prostitution related charges that they had acquired as a result of being trafficked. And I'm sure that many on the call have known survivors who have had those kinds of challenges that they have had to overcome on their criminal records. Many survivors are also parents. I mentioned the fact that many of the people that we would interact with were female. Well, some of those females are parents of children, and because of the circumstances that they found themselves in, they were often separated from their children. And tragically, sometimes those children would be placed with the individual who was doing the trafficking. Sometimes those children would be placed with other family members. But in any event, there were custody disputes and there were issues related to guardianship and adoption and alimony and all kinds of family law considerations that were invoked as a result of somebody being trafficked. And then, of course, we would run into foreign nationals. These are people who were not technically United States citizens, and so they did not have the legal right to be here, but they were being trafficked within the confines of our borders. And so in those cases, we would have individuals who had immigration-related remedies that they needed to access. But here was the problem. As often as you see those legal needs arise, it was always the case that these survivors never received any meaningful type of legal services to help overcome them. You will all know as well as I do that a survivor very oftentimes does not understand the nature, the precise nature of the legal need that they have when they come out of exploitation. And frankly, it's probably not front and center in their thinking when they do come out of that type of scenario. It's also the case, again, as many of you will recognize, that these individuals do not have the financial means to meet those legal needs, even if they did understand them. In fact, it's been my experience that overwhelmingly, when a survivor transitions out of a circumstance of exploitation, they are very often destitute and they have very little resources or none at all. And so oftentimes when you're talking about removing a survivor from a trafficking situation, they're starting from scratch, from ground zero many times in terms of attempting to rebuild their lives. And I think that's why the panoply of services that they need is so robust. But the purpose of this conversation today is to reinforce to everybody on the call and everybody who sees this recording in the future that legal needs are certainly among the services that survivors need the very, very most. I don't want us to forget that when a survivor exits the circumstances of their exploitation, they are almost always immediately confronted with this legal collateral damage, as we call it at the Joseph Project. And I know that Amanda is going to talk much more robustly about some of the specific types of needs that we see and how we meet those. But I am of the strong opinion that this mission to resolve the legal needs of human trafficking survivors is the next frontier in the human trafficking fight. I do believe that in order to move survivors to a brand new level of freedom that would previously be inaccessible to them, you have to get legal and you have to get systemic. And I think that when you do it, and you win, and we win all the time. It's amazing. A survivor is often a lawyer away from a completely different life. They win all the time, and they can't believe that this is their new reality. We get calls, we get emails, we get text messages, and it's survivors who are saying, I can't even believe that you were able to do this for me. I can't believe this is my new reality and that this was even possible. So it is among the most gratifying work that I have ever done in my entire life. And I love that we can leverage the law to do it. We can use our legal expertise, our skills in the law enforcement area to literally transition from somebody from, as we say, exploitation to empowerment. So that's the basic premise. And at that point, I'm going to yield the floor to Amanda Pallitz, the Joseph Project's amazing legal director, so that she can tell you just a little bit more about specifically how this works. But thank you very much for your time. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Veterans Day weekend.
Great, thank you, Nate, and thank you to everybody who's participating in the call. I always love to talk to service providers and individuals that are working with trafficking survivors to let them know, what services we offer here at the Joseph Project for survivors. And Nate gave a great introduction, kind of touched on a great overview of what we do here. So I'm going to drill down into a little more specific areas that you may be interested in knowing about, and then happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. By way of introduction, I am the legal director. I am also an attorney practicing 20, when I say that, it just makes me feel so old, but 20 years as a criminal defense attorney and family law attorney here in Michigan. Came onto the Joseph Project in 2019 as a volunteer attorney. Met Nate, really fell in love with the mission of the project and wanted to use my skill set to help survivors. So from there, I transitioned into the legal director. And my role here at the project is to expand the network of attorneys that we have. When we first started, we were here in Michigan. I'm happy to say that through a lot of hard work and a lot of amazing people that we've connected with, we've been able to expand that network to over 20 states where we have attorneys that have raised their hand to say that they want to help survivors. So it's been really exciting to watch that network grow. We're not going to stop until we're in every state, because there are survivors in every state, as you all know. So, but it has been wonderful to see the growth of the project, and really just speaks to the need that is out there. Unfortunately, there are so many survivors that need legal services. So half of my job is to work with, to grow that network. And then the other main part of my job is to meet with survivors, connect with them, talk with them, and go through our intake process. Nate did touch on a lot of what we see, but I would say that the main three areas of need for survivors is, number one, criminal, and that includes open active warrants. So a lot of survivors come to us and say, I've got a warrant. out of this court or that court for a drug offense, a solicitation offense, maybe a theft, all of them in some way related directly or indirectly to their exploitation. So we see a lot of active warrants that need to be recalled. You know, a survivor cannot feel like they're moving forward when they're worried constantly about being arrested or not being able to travel freely because they're worried about getting stopped and then taken in on an old warrant. So we see a lot of that. We also see a lot of active cases, violations of probation, where they were in a case and then were not able to return to court to finish that case because their freedom of movement was restricted by their trafficker. We also see a lot of survivors that want to expunge their criminal history. And that is a really interesting area of the law because many states have expanded their access specifically for trafficking survivors, but also for the public in general. There's been an emphasis in the last few years on in a lot of states and how can we make expungements, or maybe it's called vacature, where you are more accessible for people so that they're not burdened 20 years later, you know, with this criminal history that isn't really relevant anymore to who they are today. So many survivors reach out to us seeking help expunging their record. And frankly, they should have that help. They should not be burdened with convictions for things that are related to their trafficking or directly caused by their trafficker, such as solicitation cases and things like that. So those are the three main areas under the umbrella of criminal law that we see. The second main area that we see, as Nate touched on, is custody or family law in general. These are people, often women, that have lost custody of their children. There may be a guardianship in place with a family member. There may not be any formal arrangement with the court, but someone is caring for their children, and now they want to be reunited with their children. They want to work towards reintegration, whether it's custody or parenting time or visitation, as it's sometimes called. So we do see a lot of people that are seeking to be reunited with their children. And the third main area that we see is immigration, and I don't really need to go into that more. They're either here, they brought here from another country for the purpose of being trafficked, or they got here and then were trafficked subsequent to their arrival. So we do see those type of cases. We also see some civil cases, and by that I'm speaking mainly about women and men that want to change their name, seek a legal name change to avoid their trafficker finding them. Excuse me. We also work with some survivors to restore their credit. Sometimes they have their credit's been damaged or their name has been used without their permission, and accounts have been opened or things have been purchased, and now they're burdened with these issues that's preventing them from being eligible to rent an apartment or purchase a car or the things that they would need a good credit to do. So we do see some of that, but I would say the majority of the work that we're doing is in the area of criminal, family law, and immigration. When a survivor comes to us and says, I need help, often they have issues in many jurisdictions, which is why it's so critical for us to grow that network of attorneys to be everywhere we can. It's rare that I see a survivor that has only one issue in one court. Usually it's 3, 4, 5 states that because they have been moved around or they have been trafficked in various areas, they have multiple needs. When we get a call from a survivor, we go through our intake process here at the project, and we have several requirements in order for them to qualify for services. Number one, they have to be a human trafficking survivor. That goes without saying. If they reach out and they are not, we will connect them to other services or other providers that could help them. But if they are not a trafficking survivor, then we would not accept that referral. The next issue that we look at is, what is their need? Is their legal need in some way related to their exploitation? Again, it doesn't have to be a direct line, and oftentimes it's not. It's an indirect connection. But if it is in any way related to their exploitation, then that is something that we would look at trying to offer assistance with. The third thing is that they have to be what we call stable. And what that means is they have to have a stable living environment. They don't have to be out on their own. They could be in a program. In fact, many of the survivors that we work with are coming up to maybe the end of a 24-month program or a 12-month program. And this is now something that they're ready to address, these legal issues. So they can be in a residential program. They can be on their own. They can be living with family, but they do have to be stable as far as their living arrangements, because we found that it's very difficult, if they're not, for them to meaningfully engage with the attorneys over a period of time and to be receptive to the phone calls or the emails or the court appearances that are necessary. I will say Zoom has been amazing for the survivors we work with because they can zoom in from another state and they can deal with the case, or the attorney can zoom in instead of having to travel all day across the state. So attorneys are more likely to help under that situation, and it's been great for the survivors. But they do have to be stable with regard to their living arrangements. They also have to be sober. And by that, we mean they have to not have an active addiction that they are in the throes of. Again, we have found that it's much more difficult for them to effectively participate in their case if they are not at least have a somewhat substantial period of sobriety. We like to say roughly kind of use 6 months as a benchmark. Every case is different, but that's kind of what we're looking to see. So those are our requirements here. And if they meet those requirements and they do want to receive services, then we will work as hard as we possibly can to connect them with an attorney in that jurisdiction that specializes in that practice area that can help them with whatever their legal need is. One of the things that I'm most proud and happy about here at the project is that we have what we call a litigation fund. And that fund is specifically designed to cover the cost of the litigation for the survivor. Now, I'll start by saying there is never any cost for them. We don't expect them to pay for anything, and the attorneys are volunteering their time. But the attorneys often can't ethically, and we don't want to ask them to, cover court fees, filing fees, fines that are assessed against a survivor. That's, they're giving of their time, and that's more than enough. So when an attorney says, well, this case, we can resolve it, but there's a $500 fine, then we will step in if the survivor's not able, and we will cover that. Or often we will see a fine before they're able to get their driver's license back or to be eligible to apply for their driver's license because of lots of unpaid tickets or assessments or whatever the case may be. And we will step in and help with that because it doesn't do any good to have your case resolved if you still owe money and you still are under the burden of having to stress about making a payment or things like that. So that is one of the things that I think survivors are probably, they get the most, they're the most thankful for that, because they obviously are happy the case is resolved. But when we say it's done, we mean it's done. There's nothing else. It's done. It's paid. It's over. It's finished. And that allows them to move forward without worrying about it. So that's something we really, really focus on is can we help meet that need too? In addition to providing, the exceptional legal counsel that we've worked hard to grow, with our network. So that's kind of an overview of what we do here. I echo everything Nate said. This year, we've received over 100 referrals for survivors. Some of those are survivors reaching out to us that tell me, I heard about you from another survivor you served, and they said to call you and that you could help me. And that is really quite amazing that the word has gotten out to the point where they're not being sent by, by a program, but they're being sent by another survivor that says, I know that they can help you because they helped me. So that's been really rewarding to see. And this has been some of the most rewarding work I've done in 20 years of practicing law, to watch somebody go from such a horrible situation of exploitation into a situation, like Nate said, of being empowered and not having this hang over their head anymore. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. If there's something specific that you want me to touch on that I haven't already. And again, I'm thrilled, to be here and be part of this.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. I really appreciated the overview of understanding what some of their greatest legal needs are, because some of them I think are so nuanced that unless you're working directly in this field could be surprising. Like, for example, the financial burden that so many survivors experience from the impact of trafficking. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's a survivor who hasn't seen her trafficker in 5 years. And she's been through 2 programs now and has finally got to a place where she is stable, independent, and thriving. She's in college. She adopted a puppy. Like, she's doing amazing. So she went to apply for her very first independent apartment, and she can't because her trafficker is still using her name 5 years later, 5 states away. She was so disheartened. And so that's why I think the role of Joseph Project and other attorneys willing to engage in this is so vital for those that are working outrageously hard to overcome all of the trauma they experienced, and the legal barriers can just be insurmountable for some. And so thank you. There are a few questions, and please feel free to add more questions as we continue to dialogue. One of them, hi Refuge for Women, one of NTSA's very first members, glad that you're on, and they're saying any resources in the Kentucky area, but Ruthann, I'm gonna actually advocate Refuge for Women is a multi-state, and I'm sure all of your other fellow refugee states would love the resources as well. Because you're a member of NTSA, you can actually connect with Joseph Project directly through your member portal. So if you need help with that, connect with us and we'll help make that connection. The other question is, Tanya is asking, how are you going about growing your network of attorneys, especially in the rural areas? They find it's really hard to find pro bono attorneys to assist victims.
I can.
Oh, go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a great question. And I would agree, you know, when you are in rural areas, it can be more challenging than if you're in an urban area where there obviously are more attorneys practicing. We have several different ways that we do that. We partner with state bars associations in some states, specifically, you know, we would do that here in Michigan. We also partner with larger law firms in some cases. And so they have a reach of several states, which has been wonderful. And we also, you know, we work with mid-sized law firms. We go to conferences. We just were at a conference in California, a legal conference last month, where we connected with many attorneys there too. So it's really just old-fashioned, you know, meeting attorneys, and sometimes they'll hear about what we're doing from another attorney that's worked with us, so they'll reach out. A lot of those firms have pro bono counsel, where their job is to connect with, you know, organizations where their attorneys can offer services for people if they so choose. So it's really just been a state by state, you know, effort on our part to connect, and you know that has been a wonderful thing to watch grow. I will say, you know, quite candidly, in some states we have many more attorneys than we do in others, and that again is just a function of the numbers, right? We have more attorneys, you know, in urban areas than we would have in rural areas. But that is, you know, that's kind of how we connect with attorneys. Some of it is word of mouth where they hear about us, and some of it is us connecting, you know, and then through larger firms who have a bigger footprint.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Nate? I kind of cut you off.
No. In fact, I think that was a very comprehensive answer. You know, it might just be worth bearing in mind by way of supplement that even though the need might be in a rural area of a state, let's say Kentucky, for example, let's say you're in a rural area of Kentucky, but you have an attorney in a different part of the state who happens to be licensed in the particular state at issue, but they live in one of the urban centers. Well, as long as they have a license to practice in the overall state, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from serving the survivor in the rural area. So that's worth keeping in mind too, that, you know, an urban-based attorney could serve a rural-based survivor as long as the lawyer is licensed to practice in the state in which that survivor happens to live, or where the survivor's need arises. So that's worth keeping in mind too.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Nate, and glad you brought it up. Katie also asked, what if their legal need isn't directly linked to their exploitation?
Well, again, it doesn't have to be directly related. And so, you know, I talk to survivors all the time that will say, well, I have this legal need, but it really doesn't have anything to do with my trafficking. And then as I talk to them, I realize that actually it does have something to do with your trafficking. Sometimes they think it's very linear, and it's not. So, you know, it's a big difference between somebody who may have been trafficked 20 years ago and now has a new offense. We would probably say, well, that's not even indirectly related necessarily. But we take a very generous approach with that, I guess is the word I'm looking for. You know, we don't say, well, because it didn't happen during the time that you were being trafficked, therefore it's not related. That's not the way we approach these cases. We find them more often than not their legal issues are related. And
But
so we don't
Amanda,
run into that a whole lot.
but do you have any challenges? Like, for example, if you're working on an expungement case, is it difficult to prove that some of the records were directly a result of the trafficking? Do you have any issues with making that correlation for the expungement?
Well, so there's a two-part answer to that question. And the first part of the answer is that if you're going under a provision in a certain state's expungement law, like a safe harbor provision that only applies to trafficking survivors, for example, which we do have here in Michigan, then you do have to try to make that connection. But the good news is that a lot of states are starting to understand that it's not just trafficking survivors that may need help. So we don't always have to go under a specific statute that says, here's a trafficking survivor, and let me show you why this is related. It can just be the general expungement or vacature laws that they are able to take advantage of because it's been a certain number of years since they were convicted, because of the nature of the offense. It's a non-assaultive offense, or it's not what's considered a serious felony, depending on each state. So I can't say that specifically state to state because every state is different. But what I can say is we're not necessarily pigeonholed into saying, well, we have to go under a certain section of the statute because they're a survivor. That's not what we're seeing. In fact, we're seeing the laws get more and more relaxed as time goes by, which is good.
Wow,
that is encouraging. Nate, did you want to add something?
Again, just by way of supplement, I would say that, and you're probably gathering this from Amanda's answer already, but we always try to at least lean in favor of serving someone. So if it's a case-by-case analysis, of course, as to whether we can help, but we always try to lean in favor of helping somebody. But if I could just offer an extreme example to maybe clarify the point, I always remember this one because it's one of the earlier referrals that we ever received. And Amanda, this might be a little bit before your time, but it sticks in my head for obvious reasons. But we had an individual from a service provider here local to Michigan who ran a safe house of sorts and reached out to us and asked if we could, assign pro bono counsel to a person who was a survivor of trafficking from the past, but whose legal need arose because in present day, she had actually attempted to run somebody over with her own vehicle, not her trafficker. And so we remember that one and we said, that's outside of our scope. You're going to have to reach out to somebody else for that one. So I use that as an extreme example to say, if the legal need is at all either directly or indirectly connected to the trafficking, we're going to try to lean in favor of helping. But there are some things that fall so far out of bounds that we just have to say no. I hope that makes sense.
So no running over someone is
No.
Okay. That was an important clarification. Yeah.
I will say two things to follow up on Nate's point, because he has a kind of an extreme example. A lot of times a survivor will say to me, well, I have all these drug convictions and it's not really late. I had a drug problem before I was trafficked. That's obviously they're connected because that often that's why they're in that situation, to begin with. And so they will say, well, that's not related. And, I respectfully disagree with that assessment. It is related. So it doesn't have to be a prostitution conviction or a solicitation conviction. We help women with so many different types of criminal cases because, again, we take a very broad view of what is connected or related to a woman or a man's trafficking.
Yeah, awesome. Jocelyn did have to head out, but she makes a point of, you mentioned in your presentation that one of the two requirements you said was that they needed to be sober. And she said she understands that, but it could be a little bit problematic. Can you just kind of explain a little bit, both for the stable housing and the sober living, why that is a priority in terms of success in working with a survivor?
Sure, I can approach it from two different angles. Number one, for the survivor, it's been my experience, and I'm sure I would think other people on the call have had the same experience, that dealing with any court-related matters is extremely triggering and stressful for a survivor. So we have found that if they're in the throes of an active addiction, adding that to the mix is not really necessarily good for them as far as their mental health and the other issues that they're dealing with. So that's number one. Number two is we are very mindful because, again, these attorneys that we work with are amazing people. You know, they wouldn't be working with us if they didn't have a heart to help survivors, and they are giving of their time freely and generously. And we're talking hours and hours of time in some cases, depending on the complexity of the legal issue. A family law case, for example, I'm doing one now for a survivor, and I'm going into 18 months on this case. These cases with young children in custody, they're very, very rarely quick. So we are asking attorneys to sign up for what could be a pretty substantial amount of time. And so we don't want it to be a situation where they're going to court and the survivor is not showing up, or they're on a Zoom and the survivor is not on the Zoom, and in some way related to the fact that they are in an active addiction. So we're trying to be very mindful and respectful of the attorney's time. And we also don't want to put the survivor in a situation where, while we're trying to help, it might actually be compounding issues that they're already dealing with. So what we found is that when they've gotten a handle on that part of their recovery, and again, we're not asking them to be sober for years and years, but we would like to see a period of at least several months where they are getting counseling, getting help, going through recovery, because we found that it's better for them and it's also better for the attorneys.
Awesome. Thanks for expanding on that. Rose asked question, what would you suggest comes first, like the specific client or training the attorneys in your network? Because she's practiced for 28 years, but nothing like what you guys are doing.
What comes first? Well, the attorney, I can tell you, when an attorney reaches out to us and says, hey, I've heard about the work you're doing, I'm interested in learning more about maybe donating some of my time and expertise, we talk to them quite a bit about why they want to get involved, any history they have working with trafficking survivors. And we also offer training through our website, and we can point them to other resources. So we want to make sure that the attorneys that are working with the survivors, are doing it for the right reasons. And by and large, I will say I haven't had an issue with that. I haven't had to deal with attorneys that, if they're reaching out to us, that's the thing. We don't cold call attorneys and say, hey, can you help us? We want to make sure that they're here for the right reasons and that they want to truly help survivors. So fortunately, that hasn't been an issue. But if they are concerned about, well, I really don't know if I want to help, but I don't know if I'm qualified because I haven't had formal training, we have resources available to them to help them understand what trauma-informed practice looks like. And they have found that to be very helpful. So if they reach out and they're interested in helping, I speak with every single attorney that reaches out to us. I want to make sure that they understand what we're asking and that they're comfortable with that. And I want to know a little bit about their history.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Nate, did you want to expand on that?
Nothing major, although I would say to Amanda's point about the availability of those trainings, what's interesting and perhaps fortuitous is that those sequence of training sessions are actually almost top line on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel right now. We just happened to recently post them. And so if you visit either of those, again, YouTube channel or Facebook, both of which are accessible in the footer of the website, josephproject.com. If you go there, those 3 training sessions have very recently been posted. And I'm very proud to say that they're publicly accessible. You don't need a secret code to get in. You don't need anything at all. You click it, it's a YouTube video, and you can watch it. And what I really like about them is that they're very digestible. They're, I think the longest one is just a little over 15 minutes. I think the other ones are somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 7 to 10. So we're not going to bombard you with, a ton of information, but what's in there is quite good, and it's packed in there dense and tight. So if you take a look there's some really good resources, and again, they're super available. You don't need to jump through any hoops to get them.
Yeah, and I would just encourage all of you to take a look at this training. Even if you're not explicitly working with trafficking survivors, probably many of your clients have experienced some form of trauma in their life, and it just makes us better people. Understanding the basic principles of trauma-informed care and recognizing when someone's having behavior that doesn't make sense, and it could be because of some trauma that they haven't identified yet, just makes us better people working with them. So I certainly would highly recommend that resource that you guys have put together. Katie asked a really great question. If a survivor is in a program, is it better for their case manager to be working directly with you or the survivor themselves?
My answer is whatever the survivor is more comfortable with is my answer. So I often have survivors that'll reach out to us through our website or call our 800 number and say, you know, I'm in this program or that program. And so we do that. That happens quite a bit. And then I also have pretty good relationships with many service providers who will reach out to me and say, I have a survivor here who would like to talk with you. And so either way, really, whatever the survivor's comfort level is, if they want to reach out, great. If they'd rather have someone reach out on their behalf, great. I will also say that there, you know, it's probably a 50-50 split for survivors that are in a program that a caseworker or case manager will join the call. I have that's fine too. You know, as long as the survivor gives permission for that and is comfortable with that, sometimes that's helpful for them to have somebody else on the call that they know, because I'm someone that they don't yet know. So it really is, my answer really is whatever the survivor would prefer.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I think for all of the service providers on this call, that almost makes us feel a little bit better knowing that if the case manager is with the survivor after a meeting that might be really overwhelming for them, they can help them process. So another question that they have is, would it be better to contact Joseph Project once a resident is stable, but still in the midst of the program, or waiting until they're closer to graduate? Because that stable housing is there, and then they have so many more resources, but do you want them to be finished with the program?
Yeah, the answer is whenever the survivor and the caseworker think that the survivor is in a place where they're ready to start tackling these issues. So if they're in the middle of the program and this is what they really feel like they're ready to do, and this is going to be a huge important step for them, then that's a wonderful. You know, and we work with a lot of survivors who will have a court case and they're in the program, a residential program, and the case manager will send us a letter, which we can then provide to the attorney that verifies that they are in a program and that they're doing well and they're expected to complete the program on a certain date or a certain time. And you know, that goes a long way with the court system too. So my answer again is whatever the survivor and the case manager think is the appropriate time to reach out.
Awesome. That's so great. And then Taylor also asked, would you be able to help a survivor apply for disability?
We have not done that yet, and I would not say that no. I would simply say that's not been a situation that we've encountered, and so I would have to know a little bit more about what they're looking to do. But I would say that I wouldn't rule it out off the top of my head. If we think we could help, then yeah.
Yeah. And then Linda asks the question that I'm sure everybody on this is wondering, and it's, what is the official process to seek legal services through Joseph Project?
Well, that's an easy one to answer. So the best way to do it is to reach out through our website. If you go to the website, you can click on request an intake or request, does it say referral or intake, Nate? I know we've been doing some updates.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put it in the chat, and I'm thinking he's going to see it. It's josephproject.com/refer, and I think it's in the chat now. So if you can click that, that'll bring you right there. Yep, and then it's a form that they can fill out, the caseworker or the survivor, whoever is completing the form, gives us, you know, the name. The date of birth is important for future record checks and things like that. And we just ask some really basic background questions, and then provide either an email or a phone number where we can reach back out. And then I will reach back out, or our legal coordinator, Ariel, will reach back out to schedule a time to speak with the survivor over the phone to get more information. So the best way to reach us is that link that Nate just put up. We also have 800 numbers, so if somebody calls and leaves a message, you know, we would probably then say, well, can you go to the website and fill out this form? But if they can't do that, then we can set up a time to talk with them that way.
Awesome. And then Linda also asks, are your services limited to survivors in residential programs?
No. No, we have survivors. We just worked with a survivor who is in her late 50s. She was trafficked in the mid 70s and early 80s. here in Michigan, and she's retired now. She's a grandmother, I believe, but this has always bothered her that she had these things on her record that shouldn't have been there. And she reached out and said, it's not because I'm looking for employment. I have a house, but this has been bothering me for 40 years. Can you help me? And we said, absolutely. And we were able to, the attorney that we connected her with, it wasn't us. The attorney was amazing. 6 expungements, 2 felonies, 4 misdemeanors are all gone. And she was so happy, she cried, and she said, I can't believe I'm this emotional. It's been so many years, but this has been something that she's been thinking about for 40 years. So that's a long way of saying, no, you don't have to be in a program to get the services from the Justice Project.
Amanda, I love it. I love that success story. And I know you guys have dozens. So if we have time, I'd love to hear some more of those because they're so impactful. But before we do that, I do want to just quickly, we have and I'll just call it what it is, a commercial for one of our partner law firms, the LBK law firm. They're actually a civil attorney. I don't speak, I sound like a moron now. Anyways, they do civil cases. They're actually after a massive case against Pornhub right now, a class action lawsuit against Pornhub. And so if you have clients that might qualify because their videos were uploaded to Pornhub against their will, they could be a part of this. And we want as many survivors as possible to benefit from this. So we're going to show this commercial so you guys can understand a little bit about what LBK is doing in order to support survivors through this civil path.
Oftentimes we have clients come in who are going through a crisis in their life and they're looking for some direction at the end of the day. Whether you're abused as a child, have been sexually assaulted, survivor of human trafficking, whether you're a family member of a victim of homicide, what we try to do is let our clients know, first and foremost, we believe them, and secondly, that we are a safe place for them. Being a survivor myself, I understand the desire to want to get answers, to understand why something happened to you, and hold people accountable. Crime victim law is an extremely important part of that process. All of us are former prosecutors, forensically trained and trauma-informed in how to work with survivors of abuse, assault, trafficking, homicide victims and their families and things of that nature. We're not confined to a geographic location, so we represent survivors and victims all throughout the country.
They made me feel super protected. I felt as though I had a team behind me that would allow me to have my voice. My recovery process started when I hired Brian. I got a lot of my answers through Lafayette Bucci Camp.
We do more than just litigate cases. We try to be an integral part of our clients achieving healing and achieving justice. Our overall mission is to right the wrongs for our clients the best that we can and have a positive impact and change on the world throughout that process. There is no better place that you will be supported and that people will fight for you at the end of the day than Lafayette Bucci Camp.
Awesome. All right. Well, I love LBK. They are actually a major sponsor of NTSA and our work. We've loved partnering with them. They're so trauma informed. Most of them are survivors themselves of some type of trauma, so they really understand what it means. So certainly want to highlight them and connect with them if you have any ambition of seeking justice through financial means. And then the Joseph Project. Amanda, I know you guys have some incredible success stories. If you wouldn't mind, one of the pieces that I find so disheartening for survivors is the financial burden that comes from, like the financial complexities that they experience in trying to get out of their trauma. Can you talk a little bit about some legal remedies that you guys have seen to help them, either some debt consolidation, debt forgiveness, things like that?
Sure. Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit earlier. We have worked with survivors to try to remove items from their credit that shouldn't be there. I think somebody posted a question about, working with survivors that have their identity stolen. So we have had success doing that, where we have had attorneys that have challenged things on a credit, that have reached out to the credit reporting agencies and said, these are here because of criminal activity, they need to be removed. We've seen situations where survivors have actually received a new social security number because their social security number, their traffickers using it, much like I think you said earlier about the woman that you know. So we have seen those type of situations. With regard to debt consolidation, we haven't specifically worked with a survivor with that issue that I can recall. Maybe Nate can think of one that I'm not thinking of. But again, it's not something that we would say no to. It's just not something that we have seen. What we deal with the most here, like I said earlier at the project, is, the nitty gritty, right? Like the stuff that is really pressing right now. How do I get these warrants recalled? How do I get these cases resolved? How do I get this record cleared? How do I get to see my children? Not that the other things aren't important, but it's that kind of stuff that we see day in and day out. So, if somebody presented with an issue of trying to get debt collection relief, a lot of these civil attorneys can work on those things too. And in like the firm that you just profiled, those are other options too. So we definitely could help with something like that if somebody presented that. We just don't see that as frequently as we see the other things that I talked about.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we're running out of time. I want to head out in a few minutes, but shout out to you guys and the work that you do. NTSA is so grateful for that. If you are a service provider and want access to Joseph Project, let me tell you, they're just so wonderful to work with. If you are a lawyer or a soon-to-be lawyer, please connect with Nate and Amanda so that they can grow their network. I loved how Amanda said, we just grow organically. We attend conferences, we show up. A very good friend of mine says 80% of success is showing up. So yes, show up, connect with Nate and Amanda, help them grow, because the legal needs for survivors are just going to continue to increase, and having good lawyers that can support them through that is absolutely vital. Nate, Amanda, I don't know if you want to say any closing words, and then we can conclude our webinar.
No, I would just say thank you, for all the people that logged on today to watch this presentation. Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing for survivors. And if you have any questions or you have any issues that come up, please reach out to me at Joseph Project. It's Amanda@josephproject.com. Very easy to remember. And I'm happy to help in any way I can. And again, if you're an attorney that's listening and you wonder if you can help survivors, the answer is yes. Yes, you can. Even if you're not a criminal defense attorney, even if you're not a family law attorney, that's okay. There's so many needs that you can help with just by the fact that you are a trained attorney, and you can definitely impact a survivor's life for the better. You really have no idea the superpower that you have as an attorney. So,
yeah, Nate.
I would echo my thanks. I think that everyone on the call in their own way has a unique skill, and they're serving survivors with it. And for that, we're grateful. And for me personally, I just love seeing survivors win. And for me and our team here, that looks like many times victory through the legal system. But I think that what you're doing in your own right is you're ushering victories in for them in different contexts, whether that's winning over an addiction or winning over homelessness, winning in whatever context that looks like. You're providing them those necessary services. So thank you to the service providers. If you are an attorney on the call and we haven't connected with you, I did throw just one more link in the chat, josephproject.com/volunteer. You can just indicate that you're an attorney and then fill out, a basic series of questions, and that'll provide us with the info we need to connect with you. So if that's you, don't hesitate to reach out. But to everyone on the call, thank you and have a great weekend.
And let me just close out with this, because my development manager would be so thrilled. both Joseph Project and NTSA are privately funded. So if you have access to funders that are committed to helping programs like Joseph Project or NTSA, we would certainly welcome that because we are privately funded. End of year giving, let's be generous.
That's kind of you. Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Melissa.
Yeah.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.